The flickering neon sign outside the roadside motel buzzed with a hypnotic hum, casting an eerie glow on the cracked asphalt below. It was one of those establishments that seemed like a relic from another era, a relic with peeling paint and overgrown weeds in the parking lot. But when a storm rolled in that night, I realized there were some relics best left undisturbed. I was driving through a remote part of Oklahoma, and the storm came out of nowhere. One minute, the sky was clear, and the next, it was a raging tempest. The wind snatched at my car, whipping the rain into a frenzy and reducing visibility to mere feet. That's when I saw it. The roadside motel, clinging to the edge of the highway like a beacon in the storm. I hesitated, debating whether to keep going, but the downpour showed no signs of letting up, so I pulled in, desperate for shelter. As I stepped into the motel room, I shook the rain from my body, sending shivers down my spine. The musty odor of stale carpet and damp upholstery enveloped me. The flickering neon light from the sign outside painted the room in hues of red and blue. On the TV, static filled the screen, a constant reminder of the storm's fury outside. The wind howled, rattling the window panes like the restless dead trying to gain entry. I drew the curtains, seeking a momentary respite from the elements, but it only deepened the gloom within the room. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated by the relentless drumming of the rain. And then I heard it, a soft scratching sound, like fingernails on wood, coming from the other side of the wall. I dismissed it as mice, seeking refuge from the storm, just like me. But as the night wore on, the scratching persisted, growing louder, more insistent. Sleep became a distant memory as I sat there listening to the relentless symphony of the storm and the unnerving scratching. Each gust of wind seemed to carry with it a new wave of despair, fueling my anxiety. By the time the first rays of sunlight pierced through the curtains, I was a wreck, my nerves frayed, my eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean by the rain. But for me, the ordeal had only just begun. That unsettling motel wasn't just a place of refuge. It was a Pandora's box of nightmares. As the day wore on, strange occurrences kept me on edge. Objects moved, lights flickered, and whispers brushed against my ear, though I knew I was alone. My room at the roadside motel was slowly transforming into a haunted labyrinth, each creak of the floorboard. Then came the whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to slither around me. They carried no discernible words, yet their tone was undeniably menacing. They spoke of unseen horrors lurking just beyond my perception. Trapped in a prison of my own making, I desperately sought a way out. I paced the room, each step echoing my mounting terror, the walls closing in on me, suffocating me with their oppressive presence. But the whispers grew louder, morphing into a cacophony of malice, enveloping me, threatening to consume my sanity. In that isolated room, cut off from the outside world, I found myself ensnared by the malevolent energy that permeated the very walls of the motel. I yearned for daylight, for the familiarity of the outside world. But it seemed like an eternity before I could escape this oral nightmare. And finally, as if released from a nightmare, I stumbled out of the motel room. The open air hit me like a wave of salvation, the sun warm on my skin, the wind whispering hope into my ears. I made a mad dash to my car, eager to put as much distance between myself and the motel as possible. As I drove away, I risked a glance back. The roadside motel stood bathed in the harsh glare of daylight, its neon sign buzzing ominously. It looked like any ordinary roadside motel, yet I knew its normalcy was a deceptive illusion. The whispers still echoed in my ears, a haunting reminder of the terror that lay beneath the surface. I never thought a simple overnight stay could turn into such a harrowing experience. The roadside motel was more than just a place of rest. It was a vortex of auditory torment. My encounter there wasn't just a story I'd tell over campfires to scare fellow travelers. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest horrors are the ones you can't see but can feel slithering around you, waiting to devour your sanity. What makes these creepy roadside inns so terrifying is that they prey on our deepest primal fears. When we're on the road, away from the comforting familiarity of home, we're at our most vulnerable. These motels become liminal spaces where the veil between reality and nightmare thins, allowing our darkest fears to seep through. You know, there's something about staying in a roadside motel during a storm that taps into our primal fears. Being trapped in a small, isolated room as the wind howls and the rain lashes against the windows creates a sense of vulnerability that's hard to shake off. It's like being at the mercy of the elements, cut off from the world and surrounded by the sounds of the raging storm. And let's not forget the power of darkness. When the power goes out during a storm, it can turn a mundane place like a motel room into a chamber of horrors. The sudden darkness amplifies our fears, making shadows seem like lurking monsters, and every creak and groan of the building sound like footsteps in the darkness. And here's another thing that creeps me out about roadside motels: the uncertainty of who else is out there. When you're staying in a motel, you never really know who your neighbors are. Are they just weary travelers looking for a place to rest their heads? Or is there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? It's this ambiguity that makes it so unsettling. You can't help but wonder what secrets the other guests are hiding, and what horrors they might be running from. As I continued my journey, I couldn't help but wonder if the terror I experienced at the roadside motel was a unique occurrence, or a common fate. For those who dared to seek refuge in such establishments, were there others out there who had succumbed to the whispering voices, who had been lost to the shadows in those desolate rooms? As the miles rolled by, I tried to shake off the lingering dread, but it was a tough task. The experience at the motel had left an indelible mark on me. The scratching sound, the whispers, the feeling of being watched, all of it played on a loop in my mind, refusing to be silenced. It was like a dark cloud hanging over me, casting a shadow on the rest of my trip. The sun beat down relentlessly, turning the carpeted floors into shimmering mirages. I pushed open the door, releasing a blast of stale air. Inside, peeling wallpaper and threadbare curtains hinted at stories better left untold. The humming of the fridge was the only sound louder than the unease that coiled in my stomach. I wanted to get out, to break free from the suffocating quiet. So I stepped out into the unforgiving heat, hoping the vastness of the desert would stretch away my fear. But the endless expanse of sand and scrubland only mirrored the hollowness I felt inside. There was no solace here, no escape from the whispers that now seemed to echo in the wind. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple, I returned to the motel room, seeking the comfort of darkness. Maybe in the absence of light, the shadows wouldn't be so daunting. I pulled the curtains, plunging the room into semi-darkness, and the whispers began. They slithered through the cracks in the walls, weaving tales of sorrow and despair. I tried to drown them out, to find peace in the velvety darkness, but it was a losing battle. The whispers grew louder, morphing into chilling whispers, carrying fragments of stories that tugged at my heartstrings. I heard tales of lost souls who had entered these rooms seeking solace and never emerged, their stories forever trapped within the motel's shadowy confines. In the tapestry of human experience, there are moments that stand out as particularly haunting. The unsettling encounter at the roadside motel wasn't just a fleeting nightmare. It was a visceral reminder of the fragility of our sanity and the tenacity of human spirit. If you've ever found yourself stranded at a roadside motel during a raging storm, you understand the unique blend of fear and vulnerability that comes with it. The wind's relentless assault on the windows becomes a symphony of dread, while the sudden darkness that blankets the room transforms familiar objects into lurking shadows. It's in these moments of isolation and uncertainty that our primal fears take center stage. The scratching sound in the wall becomes a manifestation of unseen entities, and the whispers that dance on the periphery of our hearing transform into chilling narratives of despair. Being trapped in a roadside motel during a storm is like being caught in a web spun from our deepest anxieties. The confinement of the room, the isolation from the outside world, the play of light and shadow, all conspire to create an atmosphere of mounting dread. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we can't see. The unraveling of my sanity started subtly with a knock on the door, a casual greeting, a shared smile. But as the minutes stretched on, the smiles turned strained, the greetings hesitant, and the knocks more insistent. The line between our realities blurred, replaced by a disquieting sense of doubt. The storm outside reached a crescendo, mirroring the turmoil in my soul. The relentless pounding of rain on the window pane resonated with the frantic beat of my heart. Trapped in this room, I grappled with a growing realization that I wasn't alone. Something else was present, lurking in the shadows, feeding off my mounting terror. Then came the scratching sound again, persistent, relentless, a maddening counterpoint to the howling wind. Was it a mouse seeking shelter? A bird trapped in its final moments? Or something more sinister? Something that mirrored the turmoil within my own mind. As the night wore on, the scratching grew louder, more insistent, as if urging me to confront the darkness that had taken root in my soul. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was just a figment of my storm-tossed imagination. But the scratching became a tangible presence, a manifestation of the unraveling that had become my life. Now, I don't usually share these kinds of personal experiences, But there's something about this particular story that compelled me to do so. Perhaps it's the unsettling feeling it evokes, or maybe it's the universality of the human condition it explores. Being trapped in a roadside motel during a storm isn't just about the fear of the elements. It's about the fear of what lies within ourselves, the darkness that emerges when we're confronted with our own mortality. If you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, I want you to know that your experience is valid. The terror you felt, the doubt you wrestled with, the resilience you displayed, it's all a testament to the complexity of the human spirit. Stay safe on your travels, because you never know what horrors might be lurking just around the corner. The scratching sound still echoes in my dreams, a haunting reminder of the fragility of our sanity and the strength of our will to survive. And if you've ever had a strange or scary experience at a roadside motel, please share it with us at LUCCID TERROR. Your story could be the next chilling chapter in this ongoing tale of terror and resilience. Hey guys, tonight we're venturing into the liminal spaces between reality and the impossible, where desperate travelers find shelter in places that defy explanation. Picture this. You're driving through the Nevada desert at 2 a.m., your gas gauge hovering dangerously close to empty, when salvation appears in the form of flickering neon. But what happens when that salvation comes with a price you never agreed to pay? You're about to discover that some havens exist only when you need them most desperately, and vanish the moment you try to prove they were ever real. Trust me, after tonight's story, you'll think twice before pulling into any roadside motel that seems too good to be true. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. This happened to me about 6 months ago. I was driving back from Las Vegas to Phoenix after a work conference, taking the scenic route through the desert, because I had time to kill. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and I was somewhere on Route 49. You know, one of those stretches where there's absolutely nothing for miles. My phone had died about an hour earlier, taking my GPS with it into digital oblivion. The dashboard clock read 2:47 a.m., and I was running on fumes, literally. My fuel gauge needle had been flirting with empty for the past 20 minutes, and the last gas station I'd seen was a burned-out shell with weeds growing through the pump islands. The desert stretched endlessly on both sides of the cracked asphalt, a moonlit wasteland of sagebrush and silent judgment. I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white, calculating how far I might coast if the engine died. Not far enough. I realized. Not nearly far enough. That's when I saw it. A soft glow appeared on the horizon, warm and inviting against the cold desert stars. As I crested the next hill, it resolved into something beautiful and impossible. A vintage neon sign reading Murphy's Rest Stop Motel in cursive pink letters, with a smaller sign below advertising vacancy and 24-hour service. The building itself looked like it stepped out of 1962, a classic motor lodge with white stucco walls, turquoise doors, and windows that actually had curtains instead of boards. I pulled into the gravel parking lot, my tires crunching over stones that seemed to whisper secrets in a language I almost understood. There were other cars, there were a few travel-worn sedans, an ancient pickup truck, even what looked like a 1970s Winnebago that had seen better decades. The place felt lived in, legitimate, real. The office door chimed as I entered, triggering a brass bell that sounded like it belonged in a different century. Behind the counter sat this man who could have been anywhere from 50 to 70, with kind eyes and a sort of genuine smile that's become extinct in most commercial establishments. His name tag read Frank, and he looked up from a crossword puzzle with the expression of someone who's genuinely happy to see you. "Rough night for driving," he said, his voice carrying this warm rasp of someone who spent decades talking to strangers. "You look like you could use a room and a good night's sleep." I explained my situation: the dead phone, the empty tank, the growing desperation. Frank nodded knowingly, like he'd heard this story 1,000 times before. "Happens more than you'd think out here," he said. "Desert's got a way of humbling folks. Good thing you found us." He slid a registration card across the counter, along with a pen that felt substantial in my hand, like it was made when things were built to last. The card was simple: name, address, license plate number. Nothing unusual. I filled it out, though something nagging told me the ink was darker than it should be, almost black enough to disappear into the paper. "Room 7, Frank said, handing me a key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag. "Best room in the house. Quiet, clean, and the AC works better than it has any right to." He paused, studying my face with those kind eyes. Gas station opens at 6, just down the road about 2 miles. You'll find it easy enough. The room was everything Frank promised. Clean sheets that smelled like desert air and sunshine. A bathroom with towels so white they practically glowed. And yes, an air conditioner that hummed with quiet efficiency. I collapsed onto the bed, grateful beyond words, and fell asleep to the sound of other guests moving about their evening routines. Doors closing, water running. The comfortable sounds of temporary civilization in the middle of nowhere. I woke to bright sunlight streaming through curtains I didn't remember closing. My phone, miraculously, had somehow charged overnight, despite being plugged into nothing. It showed 7:30 a.m., full bars, and a GPS signal that placed me exactly where I remembered being in. Coordinates that made sense. Satellite imagery that showed the road stretching through empty desert. Frank was gone when I went to check out, replaced by a cheerful woman named Marie, who accepted my cash payment with the same warm efficiency. "Hope you slept well," she said. "Drive safe out there. Desert can be tricky." I found the gas station exactly where Frank said it would be, 2 miles down the road. A modern Shell station with clean restrooms and overpriced snacks. The attendant, this young guy with tired eyes, took my credit card and asked about my trip. "Where'd you stay last night?" he asked, making conversation while the pump ran. "Murphy's Rest Stop Motel," I replied. "Just back that way." His expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. He looked past me, down the road I'd just traveled, then back in my face. He repeated, "Yeah, about 2 miles back. Nice place. Clean rooms." He was quiet for a long moment, studying the desert horizon. "Mister," he said finally, "I've been working this station for 8 years. I know every building, every business, every pile of rocks between here and Bakersfield." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "There ain't no Murphy's Rest Stop Motel on Route 40. I laughed. Because of course there was. I'd just left there 20 minutes ago. I had the receipt in my wallet. The memory of Frank's crossword puzzle. The taste of the complimentary coffee that was surprisingly good for motel coffee. I pulled out my phone to show him the GPS location, to prove that I wasn't losing my mind. But when I opened the GPS, something was wrong. The satellite view showed nothing but empty desert where Murphy's Rest Stop should have been. Just sand and scrub, brush stretching to the horizon. I zoomed in, zoomed out, switched to street view. Nothing. According to every digital map on my phone, I'd slept in the middle of nowhere. "Show me the receipt," the attendant said quietly. I reached for my wallet, feeling for the paper I knew was there, but my fingers found only credit cards and cash. I pulled everything out, spread it on the counter. No receipt. Nothing with Murphy's written on it. Nothing to prove I'd been anywhere except in my car on an empty road. "Look," the attendant said, and his voice had gotten gentler, like he was talking to someone who might be having a breakdown. "People get confused out here sometimes. Desert plays tricks on folks, especially when they're tired and stressed. Maybe you just pulled over and napped in your car. It happens more than you'd think." But I remembered everything. Frank's kind eyes, the brass bell, the sound of other guests. I remembered the feel of clean sheets, the hum of the air conditioner, the taste of that surprisingly good coffee. I remembered Marie's smile as she took my cash. Those memories were as real as anything I'd ever experienced. The attendant was looking at me with a mixture of concern and pity. "You sure you're feeling all right to drive?" he asked. "Maybe you should call someone. Have them come get you." I paid for my gas and got back in my car, hands shaking as I started the engine. I drove back the way I'd come, watching the odometer tick off the miles. 2 miles, 3, 4, nothing but empty desert, and the road stretching endlessly ahead. I pulled over at the spot where I thought Murphy's should have been, got out of my car and walked around, looking for any sign that a building had ever stood there. No foundation marks, no broken asphalt, no tire tracks in the gravel that I remembered crunching under my feet. Just sand and sagebrush and the endless, judgmental silence of the desert. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake at night. As I stood there in that empty lot, I felt a piece of gravel in my shoe. I sat down on my car's bumper and shook it out. It was a small, smooth stone. Nothing special about it except for one thing. It was warm. Not desert sun warm, but warm like it had been sitting under parking lot lights all night. Warm like it had been recently disturbed by someone walking across it at 2:47 in the morning. It's sitting on my desk right now as I tell you this story. And sometimes, late at night when I'm working, I swear, I can hear it whispering secrets in a language I almost understand. I've driven Route 49 a dozen times since then, always looking for Murphy's Rest Stop Motel. I've never found it again. But sometimes, when my gas tank gets low and the desert stretches endlessly around me, I catch myself hoping that I will. Because maybe, just maybe, some places exist only when you need them most desperately, and vanish the moment you try to prove they were ever real. The question that haunts me isn't whether Murphy's Rest Stop Motel exists. It's whether I'm brave enough to find out what happens when you check in a second time. Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight we're talking about classic American diners, chrome and neon checkered floors, coffee brewing since the Carter administration, places where waitresses call you hoon and pie is always homemade. But what happens when you realize some customers have been waiting much longer than they should be? After tonight's story, you'll think twice before stopping at roadside places where the parking lot is full but nobody's talking. Hit like, subscribe for more reality questioning stories, and comment about the weirdest diner you've been to. Now grab some coffee, check the expiration date first, and let's dive into tonight's unsettling tale. This happened to me about 2 years ago, during a cross-country drive from Seattle to my sister's place in Nashville. I was somewhere in eastern Montana, on one of those endless stretches of Interstate 9, where the landscape just rolls on forever like a green carpet. It was getting late, maybe around 9 p.m., and I was starting to get that road-weary feeling where your eyes burn and your back aches from too many hours behind the wheel. That's when I saw the sign. Mabel's All-Night Diner. Real food, real people, real good times. It was one of those classic roadside signs, tall and bright, with an arrow pointing toward an exit I probably would have missed otherwise. The whole thing looked like it had been transplanted from 1950, complete with those bulbs that chase each other around the border in an endless loop. I figured, why not? I needed to stretch my legs, grab some coffee, maybe a piece of pie if I was lucky. The kind of authentic American diner experience you can't get at McDonald's or Subway. So I took the exit, following a 2-lane road that curved through some farmland before opening up into this picture-perfect scene. Mabel's All-Night Diner sat there like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. If Norman Rockwell had painted diners. Chrome exterior gleaming under the parking lot lights, big plate glass windows showing red vinyl booths, and a long counter with spinning stools. The whole place was lit up like a beacon in the darkness, warm and inviting against the star-filled Montana sky. The parking lot was nearly full, which surprised me. I counted maybe 15 cars, not bad for a Tuesday night in the middle of nowhere. There were all kinds of vehicles, a few semis, some family sedans, a couple of pickup trucks, even an old Volkswagen van that looked like it had seen better decades. I found a spot near the back and walked toward the entrance, my boots crunching on gravel that sparkled with embedded glass, or mica. A bell jingled as I pushed through the door, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. That perfect diner, smelled coffee, bacon grease, fresh pie, and something else underneath it all. Something I couldn't quite identify, but that made my stomach growl with anticipation. The interior was exactly what you'd expect. Red vinyl booths lining the windows, black and white checkered floor tiles, a long counter with chrome stools, and a jukebox in the corner playing some crooner from the 1950s. The walls were covered with old photographs, vintage signs, and memorabilia that looked authentic, rather than the mass-produced nostalgia you get at chained restaurants. But here's where it got weird. The place was packed to a booth filled, most of the counter stools occupied, but it was almost completely silent. I mean, there was the music from the jukebox, the soft clatter of dishes from the kitchen, but no conversation, no laughter, no typical diner chatter, just this heavy, expectant, quiet, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. A waitress appeared at my elbow, so suddenly I jumped. She was probably in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a pink uniform that looked like it had been pressed that morning. Her name tag read Dolores, and she had that professional smile that experienced waitresses perfect over decades of dealing with tired, cranky customers. "Evening, hun," she said, her voice carrying that warm, slightly raspy quality that comes from years of smoking and talking over kitchen noise. "Just you tonight?" I nodded, still looking around at the silent crowd. "Yeah, just me. This is quite a busy night." Dolores followed my gaze and her smile flickered for just a moment. "Oh, we get all kinds of folks passing through. Travelers, truckers, locals, people looking for a good meal and a moment's rest." She gestured toward an empty booth by the window. "How about this one? Nice view of the parking lot." I slid into the booth, and Dolores placed a menu in front of me. It was one of those laminated affairs, probably unchanged since the Reagan administration, with sections for breakfast all day, blue plate specials, and homemade pies. The prices were impossibly low: $3.50 for a full breakfast, $5.95 for a steak dinner, $1.75 for a slice of pie. Dolores asked, already pulling a cup from her apron pocket. "Please," I said, and she poured from a pot that appeared from nowhere. The coffee was perfect hot, strong, with that slightly bitter edge that lets you know it's been brewing for a while, but not so long that it's gone bad. As I sipped my coffee and studied the menu, I started paying closer attention to the other customers. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Nobody was eating. I mean, they all had food in front of them: steaming plates of eggs and bacon, towering hamburgers, slices of pie with perfect dollops of whipped cream, but they were all just sitting there, staring at their plates with this strange, vacant expression. And their clothes. Jesus, their clothes. The family in the booth across from me was wearing what looked like 1960s attire: the man in a narrow tie and white shirt, the woman in a dress with a pattern that went out of style when my parents were kids. The trucker at the counter was wearing a uniform that looked like it belonged to a company that had gone out of business decades ago. Even their hair was wrong styled in ways that hadn't been popular since before I was born. I tried to catch someone's eye, maybe smile or nod, but nobody looked back. They were all focused on their untouched food, occasionally lifting a fork or spoon but never actually eating. It was like watching a room full of people stuck in the slowest possible motion, trapped in the eternal moment before that first bite, ready to order. Dolores reappeared, her pen poised over a notepad. I ordered the first thing I saw: a cheeseburger and fries, partly because I was hungry, but mostly because I wanted to see what would happen. Would I end up like the others, staring at my plate with that same vacant expression? "Good choice," Dolores said, scribbling on her pad. "One cheeseburger, medium rare, with our famous fries. Won't be but a minute." She disappeared into the kitchen, and I was left alone with the silent crowd. I pulled out my phone to check the time, but the screen showed nothing but static. No signal, no clock, just gray and white snow, like an old television tuned to a dead channel. I tried turning it off and on again, but the static remained. That's when I noticed the clock on the wall. It was one of those classic diner clocks, white face with black numbers, and it was stuck at 11:47. The second hand was moving. I could see it ticking, but it never advanced past the 47-minute mark. It would sweep up to 11:48, then jump back to 11:47, over and over again. The jukebox kept playing the same song on repeat, "Blue Moon," by some crooner whose voice was getting more distorted with each repetition, like a record player running down. The lyrics were becoming slurred, stretched out, almost unintelligible. I tried to stand up, to walk over to one of the other customers and ask what was going on, but my legs felt heavy. The harder I tried to move, the more exhausted I became. It was like trying to run through molasses or swim through concrete. Dolores returned with my cheeseburger, and it looked perfect. Juicy patty, melted cheese, fresh lettuce and tomato, golden fries on the side. She set it down in front of me with that same professional smile. "There you go, hun. Anything else I can get you?" I tried to speak, to ask her what was happening, why nobody was eating, why my phone wasn't working, but my voice came out thick and slow, like I was talking through a mouthful of cotton. The words seemed to hang in the air before dissolving into meaningless sounds. Dolores nodded as if she'd understood perfectly. "You just enjoy your meal, hun. Take your time. We've got all night." And that's when I realized the truth. Looking around at the other customers, I could see it now. They weren't just wearing old clothes. They were old clothes, faded, like photographs left too long in the sun. The family across from me wasn't just stuck in the 1960s. They were the 1960s, trapped in this place like insects in ambush. The trucker at the counter had probably stopped here in 1983 and never left. The elderly couple by the window might have been here since the Eisenhower administration. All of them caught in this endless loop of almost eating, forever on the verge of that first bite but never quite reaching it. I looked down at my cheeseburger, and it was the most appetizing thing I'd ever seen. My mouth watered, my stomach growled, and every instinct told me to pick it up and take a bite. Just one bite. What could it hurt? But I knew that if I did, I'd become like them. Another customer at Mabel's all-night diner, sitting in my booth forever, staring at my plate with that same vacant expression, waiting for something that would never come. I forced myself to stand up, fighting against the weight that seemed to be pulling me down. Each step toward the door felt like walking through quicksand, but I kept going. Behind me, I could hear Dolores calling out in her raspy voice, "You sure you don't want to finish your meal, hun? It's the best cheeseburger in 3 states." The bell jingled as I pushed through the door, and suddenly I could move normally again. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, not looking back until I was safely inside with the doors locked. When I finally turned around, Mabel's all-night diner was still there, still glowing like a beacon in the darkness. But now I could see that the neon sign was flickering, some of the bulbs burned out, and the whole building looked somehow less solid, like it was fading at the edges. I drove away as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached the next town 40 miles down the road. At a gas station there, I asked the attendant about Mabel's all-night diner. He looked at me like I was crazy. "Mabel's," he said. "There ain't been a Mabel's on this stretch of highway for 30 years. Place burned down in 1994. Nothing out there now but an empty lot and some old foundation stones." I wanted to argue, to tell him I'd just been there, that I could still smell the coffee and bacon grease on my clothes. But when I looked down, my shirt was clean. No lingering odors, no evidence that I'd been anywhere except in my car on an empty highway. The receipt from the gas station shows I bought fuel at 11:47 p.m. The same time that was stuck on the clock at Mabel's. The same time I'd been frozen in that booth, staring at a cheeseburger I could never eat. Sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through unfamiliar territory, I catch myself looking for that perfect diner with its chrome exterior and warm lights. Part of me wants to find it again, to go back and sit in that booth and finally take that first bite. But I know that if I do, I'll never leave. I'll become another customer at Mabel's all-night diner, sitting there forever with a plate of perfect food that never gets eaten, in a place that exists only in the spaces between what was and what is. The question that haunts me isn't whether Mabel's all-night diner is real. It's whether I'm strong enough to drive past it if I ever see that sign again, pointing toward an exit that leads to a place where time stops at 11:47 and the coffee never gets cold.